All right, kids, it is Sunday night, and now that Halloween is past, it's safe to do a video about the use of blood in magic. Why should we keep our themes lined up to the holidays, right? All right, so you guys might know that blood is often described as being used in sorcery. For instance, in the Odyssey, when Odysseus communicates with the dead, he uses blood to lure the dead to his scrying pool, I think it is, to his gateway to the underworld. And the dead are lured by the blood. And blood is used in religion as well, or it has a special significance in religion, as well as in Golden Dawn magic, because in the neophyte ceremony of the Golden Dawn, the 0 = 0 ceremony, there's actually a Eucharistic part of that where people partake of bread and wine and salt, by the way, sort of like what the Catholic Church does. All right, and so let's talk about blood in ritual. And of course, the blood that's used in the neophyte ceremony is red wine. So very much like the Catholic Church uses red wine as a semblance of the blood of Christ, which is supposedly transubstantiated into blood, and then you drink it. But thank goodness it's not literally anyway. All right, so let's talk about where all this blood stuff comes from. All right, so when our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, you can imagine what it was like for them to be prey to various predators out there, namely to cave bears and to probably to saber-toothed tigers. Those are now extinct, and there are very few animals left in the world that will actually eat people, probably because humans killed everything that does that pretty much. Yeah, the only animals left that eat people are pretty much those that eat just about anything. But you can imagine what it was like for our hunter-gatherer ancestors to be migrating from place to place where the food was plentiful, depending on the season. And the weak ones in the tribe would be easy pickings for predators. And those would be the old, the young, the very young, the children, and the sick or the injured. Okay, and this is the same way it is in the animal kingdom. Not that we are really apart from the animal kingdom. We are certainly part of that, at least scientifically speaking. And the predators will normally go after the young, the old, the injured, and the sick. It's kind of like they're cleaning up. And if you are a freediver like I am, you'll notice that too with sharks. Sharks are not really all that dangerous. However, if you're swimming alone, that's one of the signals that there might be something wrong with you. Because, couldn't keep up with the herd or couldn't keep up with the school. Maybe he's injured and I should go take a nibble. Okay, so, but of course, then they'll see that you're swimming along quite capably and look confident, not splashing, you don't look like you're in distress, not really signaling that you are injured or in trouble or weak. So chances are the shark is going to leave you alone unless you start splashing as though you're injured, as though there's something wrong with you, right? And then they might move in and pretty much consider you easy pickings. We can assume that the instinct to do that arose because a healthy animal would have a lot of energy to fight back, and it would be a waste of energy then to go after a healthy animal. But somehow there seems to be a more elegant aspect to that, that the predators kind of keep the ecosystem pristine and healthy by picking off the sick and the injured and the old and the young, the easy pickings, right? And when it comes to picking off the young, it's a matter of survival of the fittest. So they're kind of making sure that the strongest and fastest are the ones who are out there proliferating. Okay, so you can see how this kind of arose. And when our hunter-gatherer ancestors were traveling or migrating, sometimes a predator, you can imagine, would pick off somebody from the group. And that person was somebody who was weak or injured or old or a child. And the attitude could be very strange, okay? Because you'll notice this happening with herds. The entire herd gets agitated when there is a pride of lions nearby hunting, like say gazelles or something like that. And they'll be agitated and they'll be very defensive. And but once the lions chase down and grabs one of the herd, probably an old one or a weak one or an injured one or a calf. Very often it's a calf. And once that happens, the whole herd settles down because now we're safe because they have what they wanted. They came for something. They got what they wanted. Now they have it, and now they're satisfied, and they're going to eat their kill now. Okay, they're not, and that's the way it normally works. They won't keep hunting and killing and hunting and killing. Why would you do that? You wouldn't want to go try to kill more than you need. Okay, and for some reason, only the humans are the ones who do that. For some reason, we've something in our evolutionary programming has gone haywire, and that we can't seem to stop consuming. We just more and more and more. And so you can imagine that, that person died so that the rest of us could be okay. We've been saved. Salvation. Can you imagine what that was like? And it would be a bloody awful thing to look at, like this, right? Scary. That was my child, or that was my grandmother. And of course, blood is also associated with birth. So it's not surprising that blood in magic is associated with birth and rebirth, birth and death and rebirth, or initiation, periods of transitions from one life to another. Okay, or one level of life to you're leveling up, right? And then so you die to that level, and then you emerge on the new level. Okay, and so blood can be something symbolically that is associated with the death and then the rebirth, because very often in our deep evolutionary memory, our deaths could be bloody and violent, and our births could be bloody as well. And that's how the association can arise. Now, in our cellular memory, the color red has lots of warning signs associated with it, right? This is why the color red is not often a favorite color for people, probably. Otherwise, it probably would be. And blood is also associated with sacrifice, but of course, remember the experience of the herd. The pride of lions captures one of them who happens to be weak or old or not strong enough. Just there's something wrong with them. They're not strong enough, and then they get picked off because of that. Okay, and because of that, that person or that little baby gazelle was sacrificed for the good of the rest of the herd. Okay, and this is why we have these myths of the young virgin being sacrificed to the dragon. So the dragon will eat the virgin and then leave the rest of the town alone. She has died so that the dragon will pretty much leave our crops unburned. You can see how that legend kind of ties in back to what used to happen to us. It's, I don't know, it's doubtful we ever made a pact with predators like the pact with dragons, where every year we sacrifice a virgin to the dragon, and the dragon leaves the entire community alone. I don't think a virgin would be enough to keep a dragon satiated all year long. But of course, these things get ritualized because they exist in cell memory. So the memory of one of the tribe dying so that the rest of the tribe could live is it's a deep kind of trauma that's embedded in us, and it demands to be processed. And to process that, we need to enact it, relive it through drama or whatever, ritual. Okay, and yeah, and drama and ritual, basically for birth and death and sacrifice. These things can be triggered and lived in a ritual or in dramatic performances. And they can be triggered to arise through images of blood, spilled blood. And of course, the sacrifice again. There we have the dove. The dove is going to make a reappearance later in this video. And of course, what was it? The blood of Jesus was caught in a cup, supposedly by Joseph of Arimathea, in one myth. And then that cup became the Holy Grail. And if you drink out of that, you live forever. Or if you drink the blood of Jesus, you live forever. All right. That's the nature of the sacrament or the Eucharist. So this idea of being born, you come out of your mother, you come out of the womb or the vagina, and you go about your business in life, and then you go back into the great mother, the earth. You come out of the mother and you go back into the mother. And so coming out of the mother is associated with blood, and going back in can also be associated with blood if your death is violent, scary, right? And so this idea of sacrifice, you can see, became ritualized in different ways over time. Now, the idea of one of the herd, okay, or one of the tribe dying or being picked off by a predator makes it seem like, oh, that person died so everybody else could live. Now, that person who was picked off by a predator was picked off because he or she was deemed weak or slow or not strong enough. There was something wrong with them. Okay, and this kind of gets translated into, well, the one who wasn't strong enough or quick enough or smart enough died. That person was flawed or sinful, you could even say, right? And so you can see how this gets ritualized, where the tribe would put all of their sins onto an animal and then send it out into the desert to be picked off by predators. And then the predators would eat the sins of the tribe. Everybody's sins would be eaten. And so the animal dies so that everybody else can live or prosper, right? And somehow out of that we get, well, we put all of our defects, if we're too slow or too dumb or too old or too whatever, all those sins get projected upon the goat, and now they're supposedly gone and eaten by the predators. Okay, well, not really, but you can see how that practice sort of has arisen. And it can turn into, well, the angel of death is going to pass through the town tonight, and we can pretty much sacrifice a lamb and put the blood outside the door, so it'll feast on the blood, and we'll be spared. Okay, it's the same image again. Remember, so whenever we saw the blood and the gore, it's like, oh, something else had to die so that we could live. It was sacrificed so that we could live. So here for the Passover, they said there was a sacrificial lamb, and the blood of the lamb was put over the doors of all of the people who would be spared. You can see it's that same traumatic memory from evolutionary past resurfacing in a ritual as an attempt to make a ritual of protection. So the bloody stuff happens over there, outside my door, and it's not going to affect anybody in here. We're safe in here, because once the predator gets what it wants, it's going to pass on by and leave us alone. Okay, so you can see how these things have evolved. A little disturbing too when you can see how they've evolved, and then you're like, oh, So is there any magic at all to using ritual, the blood in ritual? And of course, the idea of sacrifice. We have to remember that even the strongest among us, they deal in blood and gore if they are warriors. Okay, particularly in more primitive times when we had to fight in close quarters with swords and daggers and clubs and maces and bardiches and things like that. And the sacrifice that these people make. Okay, and of course, we honor the dead that way. They have died so that we can live. Same kind of thing happening again. This is rather interesting here. So this is the Temple of Solomon. Inside the Temple of Solomon in the Holy of Holies, there's the Ark of the Covenant, like in Raiders of the Lost Ark. All right, and but that's deep inside the temple. That's the most sacred place, right? But you'll notice here you've got those two columns there, Jacinth and Boaz, the two columns that lead into the interior of the Temple of Jerusalem, and eventually in the far deep recesses of the temple, there's the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant is kept. And it's almost like, oh my gosh, those two columns are like the legs of a woman. And between them, what's that? That's the vagina or the womb. That's the gateway back into where we came from. So we can penetrate back into the temple, back into where we came from. Okay, but before we go in, there are these two fixtures out there. One of them is the molten sea, which is that thing to the right with all of the oxen. The 12 oxen are holding it up. It is that brass sea. There's a bunch of water in there. And that's for washing up. You can see water's pouring out of it there, right? And so before the priests could go into the temple, they would have to be clean. Okay. Or before they made the sacrifice, right? Now, the very interesting thing about this is that on the altar, that thing on the left where the smoke's coming up, that's where the animals were sacrificed, and their blood was spattered on the horns of the altar. And the horns, of course, are heated up by the fire that's inside, right? And then the blood would smoke and issue up tendrils of smoke as though offerings to God or something like that, right? Okay. Well, very interesting too, because remember that when an animal gets picked off by a predator, it's going back into the unmanifest. It dies. It's going to go back inside the Great Mother again. Okay. And it gets eaten. Okay. And of course, new animals are born and they come out of the mother again. Okay. Literally come out of the mother then. And so this idea is that you cannot really go into the temple unless you've sacrificed something. Okay. In other words, unless you've died. Okay. But the funny idea is that you can sacrifice another animal in your place, and then you can go in. And like you've paid the price, right? And you can go on past. Very interesting idea. Okay. You can see how this arises from, that animal over there died so that the rest of us can live, right? So this is very, very tricky way the psyche works. All right. Now, the death of an animal can also symbolize, we can take that to another level and say, I'm sacrificing my own animal nature before I go into the temple. So not only do I wash myself, purify myself with water, I'm also consecrating myself with fire, sacrificing my ego, let's say, or my, animal self before I go into the temple. Okay, this is even more interesting than that because, when a predator would pounce upon one of us and then drag us off and leave the rest of us alone, we'd have this great sense of relief because, okay, they died so that we could live, and now we're going to be okay. Of course, the animals are eating that victim out there, right? But they're not burning it. All right, so there's a great insight, a very deep insight in that. The entire universe is on fire. Okay, so we're going to talk about this, all right? So for anything to come into existence, it has to enter this fiery realm where everything's being consumed. Okay, this is what life is in this physical world. Okay, in other words, we are surrounded by fire, and we are fire itself. We are our bodies exist in an unstable state where we are burning fuel to live. And as that fuel is being burned, we are doing damage to ourselves, oxidative damage. We're getting older. We cannot last in this state forever. But in the meantime, we have some kind of vantage point from which to look around. Okay, but this cannot last because everything in this universe is constantly in a state of destruction. Everything's on fire. Okay. This is the second law of thermodynamics, by the way. We'll talk about this more in a little bit, but basically anything that comes out of the womb into the world is now subject to this fiery realm where everything is being consumed and everything is sort of burning up and can't last forever. Okay, and once it's all eaten up or we get old and used up, then our soul supposedly goes back into the Great Mother again, back into the temple, right? And the animal remains are just left, at the altar to be consumed or to be burned up, as because that is their territory. The material realm is where they belong, and the soul can then pass into the temple space. All right. Now, the interesting thing is that in really all the spiritual traditions, the sacred inner space of the temple was pretty much clear of demons. Demons really didn't exist so much inside. Maybe one demon. Maybe there's one demon inside. But they existed outside the temple, and they pretty much gather in swarms around the entrance of the temple. Okay, the reason for that is if you really want to go and experience what it's like in the Holy of Holies, you have to be cleared of demons. So they are waiting for you there outside the door, and one by one, you process them and you deal with them. Okay, well, we'll talk about that in a bit. So why am I talking about demons again? I talk about demons a lot, right? Well, demons are associated with blood. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so this idea of salvation, and first of all, when the predator would pounce and grab one of the weak members of our tribe and drag him or her off and eat that person, we would all be saved. So there would be this great sense of relief, even though there's great sorrow as well. Oh, so-and-so died so that we could live. Let's honor him or her for the great sacrifice they made so that the rest of us could live. Okay. So that's a sense of salvation, right? And somehow now that gets translated into there's a type of salvation where you have eternal life. Okay. That's a little different because if a predator comes along and eats one of y'all, right? You are just free then to live the rest of your life, which isn't all that long. Maybe 20 more years or something like that. I mean, unless you're the next one eaten, right? But still, it feels like salvation, right? And of course, well, there's another type of salvation, because if you're watching this happen. You're watching your friend being eaten by the predators, and you're like, oh my God, he died so that I could live. But you're also noticing that, well, he's just going back to where he came from. This whole thing is just a great big wheel, isn't it? It just keeps going round and round. I don't know. Is he going to come back out again? Is this going to, like, reincarnation or something like that, right? It's almost like there's a great circle of life here. And then so within that process, inside that circle of life, there is a sort of sense of an eternal round or eternal mystery or eternal life. Okay, so not only did that person die so that the rest of us could live, but he's also showing us that there's nothing really to fear, because this life thing just keeps going. Okay, so somehow in the mystery of that round or that circle of life, inside that circle, there is a sense of another type of salvation. Not just I get to live my life now, but as I'm witness to this life and death, in between life and death, there's a sort of realm of eternity, let's say. Okay. That's very interesting too, because between life and death, or between the land of the living and the land of the dead, or between heaven and earth, there seems to be another realm, which is somehow connected to the blood, or the blood of the gods. We will talk about that in the next video, not this one. And so why are the dead attracted to blood, like vampires? And supposedly in rituals, you can leave blood out, and then the dead will be attracted to that blood, and you can go do something else while they're distracted. Something like that, right? Or you can use the blood to lure the spirits of the dead. Well, supposedly the spirits of the dead eventually hunger to return back to life again. In other words, reincarnate. Incarnate, remember carne, if you speak Spanish or Latin, carne means meat. So incarnate means literally to become meat. And so these spirits of the dead long to become meat again. Okay, and in that longing, it's kind of like they're lingering around, waiting for a chance for some conception to happen somewhere, and maybe they can become ensouled in a new body. It's like, hurry up, have sex. I'm looking for a body to inhabit. No, something like that, anyway. I'm sure the actual reality of that is much more interesting than sort of waiting in line. But the idea is that the spirits of the dead are sort of swirling around and restless and really hungry for the chance to return to a physical body. Okay, and so, and remember that birth is associated with blood as well as death. Okay, so that's apparently the attraction of blood is the attraction to being born. So, is there enough energy and blood to sustain the dead? Doesn't seem to be really much energy there at all. The blood cells don't even have mitochondria in them, so they don't really generate energy. They simply carry the hemoglobin, which transports oxygen to your cells, and oxygen is what the cells burn. So they're transporting fuel. Okay, so whether the interesting thing is, does blood really have a lot of magical energy in it? Not that we know of. Okay, but the interesting thing is that the sight of blood certainly triggers something in us. Okay, so it doesn't even have to be real blood. Allegedly, it could be spilled wine, and symbolically it could be like, oh, that's death and resurrection, or something like that, right? That's salvation because some blood has been spilled so that I can live forever, something like that, right? Yeah, we'll in the next video we'll talk about things like ectoplasm or etheric energy that blood supposedly has. Okay, some interesting stuff to talk about there. And why are demons associated with blood? Well, demons are associated with all kinds of trauma, but spilled blood certainly is one of the most powerful types of trauma that we can experience. There's a reason why traffic lights are red, and why any danger signs are painted red, because they are warning you of danger, and the color red is burned deeply into our cell memories, mainly because of predators who would grab one of us and eat us right in front of the tribe. Everybody's watching as our entrails are being spilled out and our blood is all over the teeth and the fangs and the muzzles of these predators that are eating us. Danger, danger, blood. So that trauma is triggered and awakened through imagery. And of course, the chief color among most types of trauma, most types of fear trauma, is red because of the spilled blood. So demons don't necessarily drink blood. But they are triggered. They arise because the color of the blood or the semblance of blood, the appearance of blood, will trigger some kind of deep memory of the trauma, which then allows the demon to arise. Because remember, demons are essentially manifestations of deep evolutionary trauma, okay, or some trauma you've experienced in this life. Okay, this doesn't mean that they're mere psychological complexes. They are much more than that. They exist beyond. Um, remember, the mind is not trapped inside your body. Okay, so it's more like they are trauma that's embedded in the collective unconscious. These demons are shared between us. They're not lodged inside you somewhere, and they're only yours. Oh, you have that demon, and I have this one. No, we both have the same. Some of us have it worse than others, but we all have. Red is a universal color for us as a symbol of danger. And every one of us is programmed to respond to the color red in that way. Okay. Now, red has many beautiful associations too. So it's not entirely a color of trauma and spilled blood. And so now, when it comes to the mystery of the crucifixion, which is very important to the Golden Dawn, and it's even important to the Egyptian mysteries. I'm trying to think of an Egyptian Book of the Dead prayer. I flow like blood from the god's wounds. I am the god's life made visible. And there's a beautiful prayer or I don't know, incantation in the Golden Dawn where the blood of Osiris's heart, the spilled blood, which is also akin to the blood of Jesus's heart spilling out into the Holy Grail. And this idea of sacrifice or being a bleeding heart. If you give your time and your effort and your blood and sweat and tears for others, it's kind of like you are willing to become the sacrifice. You are the one who's going to be picked off by the predator so that others can live, okay? Metaphorically, okay? But you're willing to put yourself out there or go through hardship for others. That's why they say blood, sweat, and tears. And they'll say, oh, you're such a bleeding heart. Like you're putting yourself out there as somebody who's going to give yourself to be eaten so that the rest of us can be okay. You can see that deep evolutionary trauma is still there, lurking there. Why would you call them a bleeding heart? That's kind of silly. There's not blood literally coming out of their heart, but somehow deep in the mind, it's like, oh, the predators are munching on them, and it's a gory feast. Thank you for putting yourself out there and being vulnerable on my behalf. Thank you for bleeding for me. All right, so now the idea of that's such an admirable thing. So if you see somebody who is very giving of themselves or a bleeding heart, it's like, wow, I wish I could be that brave. Let me try to embody that. So you have an image of somebody who is a bleeding heart, somebody who is sacrificing themselves on behalf of others, and you would like to become like that too. You wish you could be that brave. So you take that image of them sacrificing their time and effort and money and whatever it is they're doing, right? Or their lives, right? And you back into that and you identify with it and you become them. What's it like to be them? What is it like to be somebody who really gives of themselves until it hurts? I want to be that brave, that strong, and to drop my defenses on behalf of others. Okay, so you could have the idea of turning around and just backing into an image and then saying, I am the Christ force, or I am Osiris, capable of giving of myself so that others might live. There's even some rituals that say, like, I am willing to become the food of others, like that, right? So this idea of eating Jesus's flesh and drinking his blood, okay, that's one way of partaking of that same kind of heroism that he supposedly embodies, okay? And you can see that his kind of heroism also gets tangled up with weakness, because he just kind of succumbs and gets, he's not strong enough to fight against the Romans or whatever. He just allows himself to be, taken and beaten and humiliated and then crucified. Doesn't fight back because he's willing to let that happen so that everybody else can just kind of go on their merry way, right? And there's something magical about that too, because through that image, just like we saw, when we saw somebody dying so that we could live, we would look at that and say, but wait a minute, they're just going back into the unmanifest. In other words, this whole wheel of life has some kind of eternity in the midst of it. So in other words, if I look intently enough at Jesus' sacrifice, or Osiris' sacrifice, I can see my immortal self. Okay, so I'm going to partake of that. I want to drink that blood. I want to eat that flesh. I want to become what that is on the inside. And so that I can embody that kind of heroism. Okay, but then really I'm forming a connection between the immortal realm on the inside, beyond death, right? Inside the Great Mother. I'm forming a link from the inside to the outside now, so that I'm not just an external being anymore. I'm not just wandering around in the world of appearances and bodies and flesh, and where everything's on fire and being consumed and nothing lasts. That's where we are right now. This is the mortal realm. Nothing lasts here. Everything's pretty much being consumed by disorder. Just disorder, okay? It seems like everything's on fire because according to the second law of thermodynamics, everything is disintegrating from an orderly state into a chaotic state. Okay. Don't want to go too much into depth in that. It appears as though life is maintaining some kind of order in spite of that, but it's using up more energy in order to do that. Okay, and we get that energy not from blood, okay, not from some kind of magical fluid, let's say, like that. Anyway, at least when it comes to physics, we get that energy from the sun, and this is why Jesus is associated with the sun. That's why he is. That's why his holy day is Sunday, which was the holiday of Sol Invictus at the time, a sun god. And the sun coming up is such a wonderful metaphor for death and rebirth. Okay, that's the golden dawn is basically named after that, when the sun comes up. All right. And then we have the dove descending upon the cross. What a beautiful image that is. And now this idea of the blood, though, like Aleister Crowley used doves. He cut their throats. 3 doves. He drew a triangle in the sand, I believe it was, and then he got 3 doves, cut their throats, and had them bleed out onto the sand, supposedly supplying some kind of life force for the demon Karanzan to manifest. Okay, the demons are drawn to blood, supposedly, right? Well, the sight of blood will trigger the imagery of death, and then the death, and then passing into the realm beyond life, into the wherever that is, into heaven or whatever you want to call that, right? Or into the underworld, into the Great Mother, disappearing into unmanifestation. And so the interesting thing about this dove, these kinds of images happen a lot. This is the pelican, which this is a Christian symbol. The pelican was believed to peck at its own breast so that blood would come out and then feed the young, because I guess it looks like the pelican might be doing that, pecking at its own breast because its beak is so low, right? It doesn't really do that. It's a beautiful image, though, and it kind of then harkens back to those who give of themselves or sacrifice of themselves on behalf of others. And of course, it triggers that traumatic memory too, that they would die and be picked off by predators and eaten right before our eyes so that we could live. Okay, and it can feel that way too. Like if you are really giving your all for other people, it's feel like I'm bleeding for you here. Somehow that metaphor rings true. We don't know why, because there's no blood anywhere in sight, right? Well, it's that deep evolutionary memory. Now, the interesting thing is here that this is a beautiful round image. This is the universe itself. So when you can see the flow of time or the flow of entropy, this whole universe is one great big sort of explosion where the things that are sort of orderly now are slowly disintegrating into a soupy chaos. And as they disintegrate or burn up into just chaos like that, all these energy processes are possible. And of course, life is subsisting off of the energy processes as it goes. But according to the second law of thermodynamics, everything eventually will just turn into just a soup of, chaos. And they call that a heat death. Okay, so this is why you can see there's intuitively we know this because in front of the gates of the temple there was a place where you sacrificed and burned up the flesh. This is where things are burning up. The whole universe is sacrificing itself. Why is it doing that? It seems to be doing that so this something can reveal itself or something can play itself out. Okay, it's a temporary show. It's not going to last forever. And who knows, it might replay over and over again. Maybe 40 billion years, then the whole production shuts down and then starts up again and there's another show. Who knows how that works? But the whole universe is bleeding like this. They're constantly erupting into new displays of order that disintegrate into chaos. Okay, so it's the nature of the universe to do this. So if you are somebody who sort of picks at yourself and bleeds for others like this, you're kind of just doing what the universe does. This is why love is considered a universal force. It's like everywhere. Okay, everything is being done on behalf of some greater purpose. Okay, whatever that greater purpose is, you can kind of glimpse it maybe in this video. Can't really put our words on top of it to nail it down, but we can kind of see that how it's happening. And of course, it was once believed that inside the woman's womb, there's menstrual blood. Of course, it comes out once a month, right? And it was believed that the semen of the man and the menstrual blood of the woman would combine to form the new human being. And so the blood was very important for life. And you can see here the dove, the white dove, represents semen, which would then supposedly fertilize the blood, or combine with the blood to form a human being. You can see that shape like this, sort of like it's called a vesica. It's almost like a diamond shape, but not really. It's a vesica, which is emblematic of the vagina, of course. And out of the vagina comes life. And of course, symbolically going back into the vagina is back into the underworld, back into the Great Mother, disappearing back into unmanifestation. So things come out into the world, and then they process all of their stuff, their energies consumed, and they eventually burn up. They can't maintain this form forever, and then the soul, whatever it is, goes back into the Great Mother again as pure potentiality, and then eventually it's going to come back out again. So back and forth, or like a great big wheel. Okay, and this is the symbol of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which was something was led by Crowley for a while, Aleister Crowley. He didn't found it, but now it's pretty much synonymous with his philosophy of Thelema. And of course, way back there in the background is the Eye of Horus, would be like you're coming. That's the great unmanifestation, or that's pure consciousness, pure awareness, from which the male and the female principles emerge to produce manifestation. The male principle being the white dove or the semen, right? And the grail thingy down below there would be like a dish of blood, or the menstrual blood, shining forth life. All right, also in the Golden Dawn, this is a bit convoluted here because there's a bit of a little warning to the candidate. It's almost as though that they say, if you betray your oath of initiation, bad things will happen to you. And they kind of push this on you during the 0=0 initiation rite. They hand a little like chalice, a tiny little chalice, fill some kind of fluid, like and it's a clear fluid. It's a chemical, and then they say, pour this into this basin here. Okay, you pour it into the basin there, and when the two chemicals combine, they turn red. And so they have, if you're the only candidate, they have you do that so they can see that. You're like, oh, what have I done? I've caused something to look like blood. Did I make a mistake? They want you to notice what you've done, that you've done something, and now this clear fluid has become red. Okay, and they say, well, that's what happens when you break your oath of initiation. So it might seem like a thinly veiled threat, like we're going to come hunt you down with swords because you betrayed the secrets of the temple, right? No. So if you spill the secrets of initiation to those who are not properly trained, you can do harm, apparently. Okay, I am somebody who has broken my oath of initiation by coming forth to do these videos, to tell you what the Golden Dawn is really about in its essence. Okay, much of the Golden Dawn teachings are already spilled and doing damage out there, as you can tell. People are taking them very literally. Some people probably think that, use of blood in ritual, or the wine actually gets transubstantiated or things like that. Um, well, some people believe that semen actually has super magical powers in it, where it's all the energy of the life that's required to produce a human being is in the semen. Wow, this is amazing stuff, right? Seriously. So there's a lot of misunderstanding when we work with magic that way. And so when you when you give people symbolic communication language like that, there's a risk that they will take it literally. And what happens is that renders that knowledge opaque. The knowledge, if it's properly conditioned into you, renders your consciousness or your ability to see transparent, so you can really see through it. You can see past it. Okay. But if that knowledge is given to you and you're not properly educated, or you haven't done the right awareness techniques or enough ritual magic or enough meditation, you just see the symbols at face value, and they become opaque to you. They're a barrier, and so you're stuck on the outsides of things. This is what that really means. So when you pour the fluid into the basin and the liquid becomes red and you can't see through it anymore, that's the impact of spilling knowledge out to those who aren't ready for it. Phew. Okay. The whole universe is like that. The whole universe is bleeding on our behalf in that manner. This is the way things work. We are looking around us. Things are presented to us, and we are not ready to see them this way. We see them in a very external way. We see them as opaque. We take them at face value. We cannot see past them. Okay. And so it's already happening. In other words, the wine has been spilled. The sky was bruised, the wine was bled, and now I'm being led on and on and on and through this maze of suffering because I can't seem to see past all of the symbols that are all around me. Okay. That's the nature of the betrayal of the secret knowledge, okay? But we're already in that state. The universe is already showing us things that we're not ready to see. That's why we're suffering. And so the task is then to render ourselves ready to see them, to see past them, to see through them, to render things transparent. Okay, that means not looking at things literally. Okay, and there's a lot to be said about that. And I'll be talking about that in the next video some more, because we're going to talk about the blood of the gods. Okay, and of course, I don't literally mean the blood of the gods, do I? But if you think there are gods out there that we're gonna bleed them and drink their blood, and like, hey, that's pretty cool, that's already a misunderstanding. Okay, so yeah, so hopefully these videos are not having me break my oath of initiation too badly, because I have kind of the belief that those who aren't ready to hear these things will simply lose interest, or they'll just take it to a harmless place and just kind of play with it for a while and be like, whatever. I got a little bit of result here and there. It kind of made me suffer more, maybe, right? And forget it. This isn't working. And there are a few people who will take it on and use these practices as enlightenment practices. And I do have to say that the Golden Dawn was probably mostly full of initiates that weren't really initiates. They took the rituals into places where they were trying to get literal and specific results out of them. It's not that you can't do magic for results, okay, but you have to understand how it works in order to do that. And I've talked about this at length in other videos, right? These things are primarily enlightenment practices, and much of the Golden Dawn was an attempt at restoring them to the Enlightenment practices. Okay, and a good example of there are two good examples that I know of that are still other traditions where the Enlightenment practices have been kept relatively intact, somewhat corrupted, but sort of relatively intact. That's Tantric Buddhism is another tradition where you can get true initiation as well as magic, and Tantric Shaivism is another one that I know of. I'm sure there are others. I think even there's some hoodoo practitioners out there who use blood in ritual, by the way, who also have some voodoo and hoodoo practitioners, and maybe some mystic Christians. Who knows? Even Zen practitioners sometimes, yeah. Level confusion, okay? So to look at a substance and say, oh, the substance is the thing that it symbolizes. Okay, so like in the vampire mythology, the great saying is, "For the blood is the life. The blood is the life." That's kind of an insane person trying to convince himself that I can extract vitality from blood. Okay. The way I interpret that is like, if I got past this trauma, that blood was constantly triggering me, and I could relax, then I would experience vitality. But they're mistaking that, and they're saying if I drink the blood, I will get the vitality. It's like, well, no. You need to process the trauma that blood is associated with. Let it go, so you can just let all that energy fly free. There's your vitality. Okay, level confusion. I've had people respond to previous videos to say, "Oh, semen has so much energy in it," and I'm like, no. I think the example I gave was a single seed could produce an entire forest of trees, many forests of trees, actually. That doesn't mean that that seed has enough energy in it to produce several forests. Okay, the seed is not the source of the forest. Okay, so in other words, that so sperm is not filled with the energy that will create an entire race of human beings, let's say, or an entire generation of human beings, right? No, that energy comes from the sun primarily, at least in our local system here. If we're talking physics, right? The energy comes from all around. It simply gets triggered by the seed or the sperm or the egg or whatever. Okay. Same thing goes for blood. Blood is not the source of the energy. It's not life itself. It's a component that makes that life possible. If the blood were absent from our bodies, it wouldn't be possible. Okay, the energy comes from somewhere else. Okay, could the energy manifest without the blood? Not in this form. Okay, but we should not confuse the energy with the blood. That would be madness. Level confusion. Okay. And much of insanity is pretty much derived from level confusion, or another word for that is reification, the fallacy of reification, which I've talked about in other videos too. The ones on astral projection, I think the first video on astral projection I talked about the reification fallacy, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, and the next video, just one more, will also be about blood, but this time the blood of the gods. And what do I mean when I say the blood of the gods? Because I don't literally mean that now, do I? Okay, so we will talk about that next time. So until then,